catch myself either talking too fast or missing something that's really kind of important. Sharon asked a question about predestiny, predetermination, and then we talked a little bit about choice and free will, if you will. So I want to clear that up a little bit. When we talk about anything philosophical or theological in Judaism, it's sort of challenging because we have to be able to what I call tolerate ambiguity. Tolerating ambiguity means that sometimes there are, and especially because I am not an Orthodox rabbi. If I was an Orthodox rabbi, this would be a lot easier. I would give you a binary. I would give you a black and white response. And the answer would always be because that's what the Torah says. But because I don't approach anything that way, although I'm giving you information that any very super halachic Jew could give you, because I want you to know that there's a range, tolerating ambiguity is sort of something in the non-Orthodox world that we have to be able to do in order to not just throw it out and say that's Norishkeit, it's old-fashioned, it doesn't mean anything, and reject it. That is not the Reform approach. So example, I don't keep kosher because I'm a Reformed Jew. No, that is an incorrect response to why you don't keep kosher. If you don't observe kashrut, it's because you've studied the laws of kashrut. You understand the laws of kashrut. You have even maybe at some point in your life integrated the laws of kashrut and felt, feeling's important, that there's no meaning in it for you, that it's old, anachronistic, it doesn't make sense. It made sense at one time, but it doesn't make sense this time. And then, because people play with this idea of I keep kosher at home, right? I eat treif at home on paper plates, right? You can't be partially pregnant. You can't be partially kosher. You either do or you don't. It's binary. If I'm an Orthodox Jew, I can or I cannot eat it. The Torah says these are the things I'm prohibited from eating. It's easy. But when I'm approaching it maybe with a rationale or trying to understand it in a bigger sense of the tradition, but I have to understand it and what it is before I can reject it. Having said that, here are the two thoughts, feelings, whatever you want to, that are in conflict that also, if you can tolerate the ambiguity, you can understand. Not better, but maybe it'll make your life easy. Because I'm giving you permission to A, be confused, and B, to know that there may not be an answer. God created the universe, the world, and everything in it with predetermination. Yes, everything is destined and predetermined. The problem is that human beings, our individual souls, make choices that veer away from that predestined vision. So it is set in the stars, if you will. It is set in, without time and space, it is set, the intention for every human being. How do we know this? We have to go back to the Garden of Eden story. Because the Garden of Eden is all about these are the things that you should do, and then you stay in the Garden of Eden. And the first two human beings decide not to do it. Right? Don't eat from this tree. Don't eat from this one thing. And then they do it. And then what happens? They get kicked out of the garden. So if you can understand that the intention, and this is where it gets tricky, the intention is the Garden of Eden. But the outcome is not what the intention was. Or was it? In other words, was it predetermined that Adam and Eve would get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, that women would experience labor pain and men would experience sweat from working? And that's where the question mark is. We don't know. We don't know God's intention because we don't know God. And that's as far as I can take that for right now. Both exist, both are true. Predetermination, predestination, and the confusion of human choice and free will. What Torah gives us is a guide for the other 90% of life, 95% of life. The things that we can control with the abilities that we have, the tradition that we observe, and the actions that that tradition requires of us. You can call them mitzvot, I'll call them actions. Okay? So I'm just going to leave that there, because whenever we talk about judgment, these are obvious questions that come up. You know, am I being judged for other people? Am I being judged for decisions that I've made? Am I being judged because of a situation that I was put in, that I didn't choose? I didn't choose to be born into this family with this parent who was that abusive, right? These are the hard questions. Why would God put me in an abusive relation with an abusive parent? Those are the big questions of life. And to say that wasn't God's intention, God has literally nothing to do with that, is very confusing and very harsh. But it's part of the Jewish journey. To just simply say it is or it isn't and that's it, let's move on, is not the Jewish thing to do. In other words, we have to struggle, suffer, feel the pain, and find meaning and purpose within the situation that we're in, because God also created us with the opportunity to not do what was done unto us. And that's easier said than done. Very much so. Okay, now we're going to go on tonight. I will speak for a few minutes and then we're going to do some questions. The questions of cremation and resomation. Did I pronounce that right? Resomation. Resomation is it's cremation, very fast acting without fire. We'll get to it in a second, and I'll explain it in a second. The Reform movement did something very tricky, and this was all the way back in a long time ago, namely in the late 19th century. I think it was 1873, I want to say. The issue of cremation came up, the question of cremation. What is cremation? Cremation is non-burial, having my body put into a very, very, very hot environment and then what we call cremains, or my remains, are dust. And it's a literal dust to dust if you want to think of it that way. So the Reform movement in 1893, adopted this resolution. I want to be honest with you and be very direct. This is not judgmental. If you have decided to be cremated, that is your choice. And I just want to make sure you have the information as to why. They were opposed to it and still are. In other words, rabbinic authority in a non-Orthodox movement is meaningless. Rabbinic authority is meaningless in the non-Orthodox community. In the Orthodox community, you don't do anything without first asking your rabbi. And that goes from how you kosher your house to how you raise your children, where you educate them, and how you're buried. There's no question in the Orthodox community that it is not okay to get cremated. In the Reform community, it was not okay, but what they did was very Reform. This is what they said: be it resolved, this is 1893, that in a case, we should be invited to officiate as ministers. They refer to themselves as ministers and reverends in the original Reform movement, because they wanted to be Protestants so badly, as ministers of religion at the cremation of a departed co-religionist. This is very old English. In today's English, to officiate as a rabbi at a fellow Jew's funeral service, we ought not to refuse on the plea that cremation is anti-Jewish or irreligious. What they're saying is, you can officiate at a service for a memorial service, let's just say, for someone who is being cremated. You'll notice they did not say, we are opposed to cremation. They skipped over that. They wanted to have a positive message, which is, we aren't willing to say that cremation is anti-Jewish or irreligious, but we are willing to say, but we're opposed to it. And you want to talk about conflicting ideas, right? We're opposed to it, but we're not going to not, it was a double negative, we're not going to not officiate at a service for cremains or for someone who has been cremated on the premise that it is un-Jewish. But that's what we're thinking. But we're still going to, out of respect for the dead, they took the mitzvah of caring for the dead body, that mitzvah that we talked about last week when we talked about washing and preparing a body. They took that concept and said that's more important, that we are there for the family, for the dead, and so on and so forth. And so in 1893, their runaround was to say, don't get cremated, but if asked to officiate, do it. Reform rabbis consider Jewish burial as normative and respectful treatment of the dead. Jewish burial as normative. What does that mean? This is a big deal in Reform Judaism. There were some rabbis in the early Reform movement in the United States who wanted Shabbat to be on Sunday. Why? Protestant envy. They take Sunday off. We should take Sunday off. We're Americans now. But because it is not normative in any world that Shabbat would be on Sunday, there were services on Sunday, Shabbat services on Sunday. How do you think we got Sunday school? Like, why do you think the Reform movement never did religious school on, not never, did not do, many did actually, moved it to Sundays, because that's when the other kids were at church. It is not prohibited, but preferred. This is now from 2014, not much changed. We actively discourage it for two reasons. The rationale why. Number one, burial is the normative tradition of Jewish practice. Shabbat is celebrated Friday night to Saturday. That is a normative tradition. Pesach, you all know people who had Seder before or after Pesach this year, because that's when it was convenient. Now, I don't want to be judgmental. That's also sometimes better than nothing, right? But, we couldn't get our schedules. No, the holiday doesn't care about your schedule. This is when Passover is. It is our normative tradition. Burial is the normative traditional Jewish practice. And second, after the Holocaust, cremation has taken on deeply negative associations with one of the darkest periods of our people's history. When a kid asks me, a confirmand, for example, why do Jews not allow tattoos? I tell them the biblical reason for it, the old reason for it, which was your body is on loan from God, so on and so forth. That never works. But tell a kid, because of the Holocaust, don't get a tattoo, because numbers were tattooed on the arms of Jews. 9 out of 10 times they're probably going to end up doing it anyway, but they're really, really going to think harder and long about it. It's a whole different mindset. So, two reasons primarily. You'll notice in 2014 and back here, they didn't talk about resurrection of the dead, which we're going to talk about tonight. The fundamental Jewish reason you do not get cremated is because when your body is resurrected, you need to have bones, right? The skin, the organs, all of that will be formed by God. We're going to see that, not exactly that text, but we're going to see that in a moment. But if you don't have even your bones left, you can't be resurrected, which means you will not get to enjoy in Yemot HaMashiach, in the time of the Messiah, when the Messiah comes. There is this idea also now of resumation. Resumation is an alkaline hydrolysis. I'm not a scientist. I don't play one on TV. Resumation is a liquid with chemicals that will decompose a body in a very, very, very short time for like $600. The argument of people who provide this service is that it's better for the environment. It's better, and it's much, much, much cheaper, right? So if you can't afford it, or you want to make a green decision, you would do this alkaline hydrolysis. In 2014, the rabbis in the Central Conference of American Rabbis said the following: resumation should at least be as acceptable as cremation in Reform Judaism. In other words, we're not pro-cremation, but it's acceptable. Cremation, despite our discouragement of it, remains officially a permissible practice within our movement. Alkaline hydrolysis is certainly no more objectionable on a moral or religious ground than cremation. The preference is still burial in a grave. Indeed, since much of our recent turn against cremation stems from its symbolic evocation of Nazi crematoria, it follows that resumation, which does not involve fire, but this liquid, would be even less objectionable. So if anything, if you're going to do one or the other, do this one, because there's no right? That's just this was written in 2014. So this is the ruling today. So in other words, you get it. I don't need to repeat myself. All right. The idea of the greening, the environmental thing, is answered as follows. Number one, there are more Jewish cemetery plots available that are already permitted for cemetery plots. In other words, you can't close a section of Beth Israel Cemetery and sell it. You can't exhume bodies. That is totally forbidden under almost every circumstance. So you can't sell off a portion of your cemetery because that's what it's there for. If all of those sell out at some point in the future, then the justification of what's better for the environment can be used. Number two, every Jewish cemetery, including ours, can do green things. We have solar panels for the house that Ben lives in. You can put solar panels on your water pump. We have 2 water pumps. We don't have city water. We have well water. You can do other things to green your cemetery. And number three, there should be no financial hardship. Now, I will tell you, the funeral business is a massive business. And so please don't quote me on this, even though I'm going to say it on YouTube. They are in the business of making money, and their margins are not thin. If you do a traditional service with a traditional casket, which is a casket that is made of simple materials, it's not tons of money. If you can't afford a funeral, every Jewish welfare society, every synagogue, including Beth Israel, takes care of it for you. We're supposed to be built to do that for you. We are obligated to do that for you. We have a couple hundred graves of a defunct synagogue at our cemetery that we take care of. And it's not like we get to send the bill to the Jewish Community Foundation or Federation, right? We pay for it because that's our obligation. It's our mitzvah that we fulfill. So this is not, the green idea makes a lot of sense. The more grass you plant, the more you have to mow it, the more water you use. Yeah, at the point when there are every grave of every Jewish cemetery in the country is sold out, then we can have that conversation. But because it's pre-designated for this right now and the land is available, the financial burden shouldn't be a burden because the community is supposed to take care of you. And there's no environmental impact because the graves are going to be sold at some point one way or the other. It's already designated for such. So those are the things about, and I wanted to just go to the Reform Movement's Central Conference of American Rabbis position on those 2 items, resumation and cremation, so that you know how we came as a movement to these decisions. So again, just like the question I posed at the beginning, tolerate ambiguity. If you look back at the first thing that I said, normative, respectful, Holocaust, and traditional Jewish practice. We don't see it as anti-Jewish or irreligious per se. And we are not for it and not against it, but it's not our preference. Or as my mom, a blessed memory, would say, do what you want. Which you know what that means when your mom says, do what you want. Don't do it. Exactly. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? But I mean no disrespect. We officiated services for people who are cremated all the time. It's generationally switching a little bit, but nonetheless, most people are actually shocked by the idea. People will ask if it's okay all the time, but they've already made their plans. I mean, they've already made their plans. So that's what that is. Sometimes people change their mind, sometimes they don't. Okay, let's just do a few questions, and then I'll answer them. Sharon. Resumation. Okay, what is that? Okay, same idea, though. Okay, yeah. The reason for, okay, we'll get to that in a second. Before the Holocaust it happened, what was the reason for rationale or reason for not being cremated? And that's where that first text comes in, that the rabbis in the Central Conference of American Rabbis said that you can do it, but it's not what we want to do, because it was normative, because it was one of the untouchable Jewish practices. The Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the Reform Movement Rabbinic organization, has a responsa committee. The responsa committee to the question of who decides to add on because of the crematoria and the Holocaust. Who decides to add that on? First of all, it was already becoming a thing after the Holocaust that we wouldn't voluntarily do that. But the rabbis in my rabbinic organization on the responsa committee made a decision, and sometimes these are pages and pages and pages long, saying, adding that reason to it. So that's who does that, yeah. And every movement has a halacha committee or a responsa committee. Joe? Can the ashes of cremains go into a Jewish cemetery, or do they stay at home? Did you have it back up? Mm-hmm. Is there anything left? Yeah. If in the alkaline method, is there? It's similar to the cremains. You would get something, or yeah, to bury or do whatever. Yeah. We'll talk about that in a second. The urn. Where do I put the ashes? Okay. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A little bit. Mm-hmm. So you're asking a bigger question, which is if something goes through a responsa committee, you'll notice it doesn't change all that much from 1893 to 2014, which is highly unusual in the reform movement. Still, the preferred, I didn't put the whole response in there, still the preferred, and what we're supposed to help people understand is the preferred method is burial. That does not change. They add in something because it's a new technology, this resumation. They add that in there because it's new. But the question you're asking is it all bets are off on all of Jewish law within this responsa committee? And I can't answer that in particular tonight because that would take us off topic. But I will say the responsa committee doesn't always get it right. And because Reform rabbis are autonomous, it doesn't matter. Last question on this. The option that I'm using this, there is the option that many of you have brought up is the same. It's all the same. I used these two as examples of templates, but it's the same answer. It's the same answer that we don't recommend cremation or any other. We don't recommend anything other than burial. That's not our recommendation. And those are the reasons why. Let's get on to resurrection. I know that you have a question, but I got to move on because I don't want to run out of time and then I'll be sad. Okay, Kehilah Kedoshah. Now, I almost don't like teaching this because it's really not a thing in Reform Judaism. In fact, the prayer, Mechayeh HaMeitim, doesn't even exist in our prayer book, although it was reinserted in Mishkan Tefillah, in the Giverot prayer, in parenthesis. Right? So many of us grew up saying, Mechakel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayeh Meitim Beracham. But now we say, Mechayeh HaKol Beracham. What is Mechayeh Meitim? The second prayer of the Amidah, the Giverot, praises God, who will, in the old version, or in the version in the conservative and Orthodox synagogues you attend, who will resurrect the dead. Mechayeh, give life, meitim, to the dead. That's literally what Mechayeh Meitim means. Techiyat Meitim is another way of calling it. If we look in the book of Daniel, There are two proof texts. There are many more than two, but there are two that I wanted to show you tonight. One is from Daniel, and we remember Daniel, chapter 12. Daniel's the only book of Torah, of Bible, of the Tanakh, that has in it Aramaic. It's written mostly in Aramaic. And here's the thing about at that time. What's at that time? And we're not doing Messiah tonight. There's just not enough time. We can do another class on Messiah. At that time, when the Messiah comes, that's what that time is, the great prince Michael, Michael, the head honcho angel of God is Michael, who stands beside the sons of your people, will appear. It will be at a time of trouble, the like of which has never been seen, has never been since the nation came into being. He's in Israel. He's speaking to the people of Judah. And he's saying, at the end of time, it'll be worse than anything we've ever seen. At that time, your people will be rescued, all who are found, inscribed in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust, i.e., the dead of the earth, will awake. Some to eternal life. They'll go to heaven. Others to reproaches, to everlasting abhorrence. And the knowledgeable will be radiant like the bright expanse of sky, and those who lead the many to righteousness will be like the stars forever and ever. I'm sorry, I misstated. The ones that sleep in the dust of the earth and awake, some to eternal life, that is eternal life here. In the Messianic, they'll go to all the bones. Remember I said last week, all the bones in those tunnels that are underneath the graves will twirl, spin, and pop up in the land of Israel. Some, the righteous of the righteous of the righteous, they get to go to heaven, and others not so much. So in the book of Daniel, he shares a vision, a prophecy of the resurrection of the dead. Another resurrection of the dead story is in Ezekiel, our good friend, the prophet Ezekiel, one of the three main prophets. And he said to me, God, you know this one probably, O mortals, these bones are the whole house of Israel. He's standing over this valley. Many of you have visited it in Israel. They say, our bones are dried up. That means they're dead. Our hope is gone. We are doomed. Prophesy, therefore, and say to them, thus saith the Lord, I had to put in a saith, the Lord God, I am going to open your graves and lift you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel. These two, this text and this text, are what we call proof texts. That is to say, texts from Tanakh that give us knowledge that in Torah times they believed in the theology of the resurrection of the dead. The prophets, Daniel, and I only gave you two, there are more of them, and Ezekiel, both mention the idea of Techiyat Metim, the resurrection of the dead. So it is a very fundamentally Jewish idea. They will come and all will be good. All the bodies will go. Now, let's move up from Tanakh to the Rabbinic tradition, hundreds of years later. This is Talmud, which is written between the 2nd and the 5th century of the Common Era. And this is from a tractate of Talmud called Sanhedrin, page 91b. It is taught in a baraita. A baraita is like a story. That Rabbi Meir said, from where is the resurrection of the dead derived from in the Torah? He's got another text for us. It is derived from a verse, as it is stated, that Moses and the children of Israel will sing this song to the Lord. We just chanted this at Pesach services this last Saturday morning, the Song of the Sea. How do I get that from this verse? It is not stated sang past tense in the verse, rather the term they will sing. Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. Az Yashir, they will sing, the children of Israel, this song to God. It is not stated, they sang it in past tense. They're at the Red Sea. You would think the Torah would describe a story that already happened. Oh, that's how I would think it would be. The Torah would teach, this is the song that they sang past tense at the splitting of the Red Sea, but that's not the verb. I mean, that's not the grammar. The tense, thank you. It's the Vav Hayipuch. But there's no Vav Hayipuch, so it's future. And they will sing this song to God. is stated, indicating that Moses will come back to life and sing that song that includes Michamocha. Indicate Moses will come back to life and sing the song in the future. From here, it is proved that resurrection of the dead is derived from the Torah. How do you know? Because it says so in the Torah. How easy is that one? Derived from the Torah. On a similar note, you could say, oh, let's go to Joshua. Then Joshua will build an altar to the Lord God, Adonai God of Israel, on Mount Ebal. It is not stated built in the past tense, rather will build. From here, resurrection of the dead is derived from Torah. The rabbis want to make sure it's just like any kind of legal code. Here's the proof. It's in this case, in Joshua and in Exodus, that the tenses are used in the future tense to indicate that will happen. Will. That's it. One word. If you're a lawyer, you like this stuff, right? All you need is the word, or the tense in this case. How do we know? Because it's in the Torah. And if I believe the Torah was written by God, handed to Moses, handed to the people, handed to Joshua, handed to the great assembly, and handed to us, I have no doubts. Which is why I said in the first week, one of the things that gets you out of heaven, where you can't go to heaven, is not accepting resurrection of the dead as a fundamental principle of our Jewish life. Another one. Oh, wrong one. Okay. That's that. That's all I'm doing on that. Questions about resurrection. Only about resurrection. Yes, Patty. If what? Yeah. That was bad timing for me to take such a big sip of water. The question was, let's say I can get if the idea premise is I can only be resurrected if I have my bones intact, like the Ezekiel passage, the dry bones that he sees. Like I can't get resurrected without the material necessary, which in this case is the bones. It doesn't talk about organs, doesn't talk about skin. Can I, if I'm missing a limb, or let's go even further, if I'm at war for God, I'm in the Israeli IDF, and I lose not just my leg, but my body blows up. Right? One of the things that we learned in Israel in December of 23, when we went to the military headquarters, where they did all the Kehilah Kedoshah, they prepared all of the Nova and military bodies for burial, something like 2,000 bodies in 3 weeks. They had one, I don't even know what it was. I think it was a part, because in Kfar Aza and the kibbutzim, the bodies were burnt to a point that they couldn't even get DNA samples from them. And so the question from Patty is, what are they going to be resurrected? Are they going to be? They have nothing. By the way, the end to that story was there were two faintly recognizable bones that were sent, I guess, in Quantico or in Baltimore or wherever in D.C. There's one DNA lab that's better than what they have in Israel, but only one in the world, and it's in D.C. in the D.C. area, and it's like the National Forensics Institute or something like that. And the guy in D.C. said to the Israelis, because they brought these bones over to have them analyzed there, or these, not even bones, these pieces of bones, and they were like, what are you doing schlepping 10,000 miles? And they said, we're Jews. This is what we do. It's more important for us to be able to do everything we can to identify who this body is than not to. It's a Jewish value. So I'm gonna answer organ donation again, because that I think I was a messy in my answer last week, which was if I donate organs, which is against Jewish law, because they didn't have organ donation when they created the laws about organ donation. I mean, about resurrection, right? They didn't know from this. There are two conditions in which your body and your organs and your bones are given back to you. Number one is to save the life of another person. Donating my organ gets me an exemption to the rule of resurrection. If not an exemption, you're in the category of people who aren't resurrected and go straight to heaven forever and ever and ever. Because you say there's no greater Jewish commandment than to save a life. No greater. And for those of you who have donated bone marrow before, whether the person dies or doesn't die from your donation, no greater. Has everyone registered? Probably at some point you registered for bone marrow, I would imagine. I actually ended up doing it twice. The first person died of what's called host versus graft disease. Yeah, host versus graft, which they wanted to make sure I was okay. And I'm like, because of what I do for a living, I'm fine. I mean, it is like, right? And the other person was saved. And I don't talk about it much because I'm not that kind of person, but I felt really, really good because I literally saved someone's life. And that made me feel good. If I then go get to the next step, I'm on life support, they can harvest my organ, which is an even, to me, higher level of saving a life. There's got to be an exemption. The rabbis create these exemptions, these exceptions. Every rule has an exception. It's called pikuach hanefesh. Every mitzvah, every single mitzvah has one, well, there are more than one depending on, like you can take medicine on Shabbat, you can go to the doctor on Shabbat. If you're a Jewish doctor, Orthodox doctor, you can perform surgery on Shabbat and drive to the hospital, deliver babies. All the exception is health/risk to life and saving a life. And those exempt, so if I am the Chabad, no, Chabad's probably not even the best. If I'm one of those rabbis from Baltimore, like as right, proper, pious as possible, and I'm a doctor, and I need to do surgery on someone on Shabbat, which would require me to drive to the hospital and so on and so forth, I do it because they're saving a life. Because someone else's life is in your hands, quite literally. That absolves you. It erases the mitzvah of observing Shabbat. So the answer is there's an exemption for resurrection of the dead. The IDF guys, this is very interesting, we learned this last December, who they prepared for burial do not get buried in shrouds. They get buried in their uniform. Because they die al kiddush Hashem, which is the second biggest category, right? The highest category is saving a life. The second highest category is dying for the sanctification of God's name. Al kiddush Hashem. It is called, in other worlds, martyrdom. But Jewish martyrdom is much different. So if I die defending the state of Israel, I'm in my uniform, even with the bullet hole in my uniform, that's what I'm buried in, not a shroud. And so that also teaches us that there are certain mitzvot that absolve us from the mitzvah of getting buried in a shroud, dying for the sanctification of God's name, dying defending the state of Israel, donating organs, and so on and so forth. These things absolve us. So we're either resurrected or we go to heaven. There are two outs for it. Last question on this, and then we're going to go to Gilgul HaNefesh. Yes. Is there a difference between I'm going to donate my body for research, I'm going to be a cadaver in a medical school, or they're going to do research on my, I love that movie Concussion, right, with Will Smith and another Albert Brooks movie, where they try to get the football players to donate their brain tissue so they can research the disease that football players get from having head injuries. It's a great question. For the most part, you're not allowed to donate for science, for research, if you're Jewish. There are 14 million Jews on the earth. There are billions of other people. We make up 0.02% or whatever it is of the population. This is one of those things where the rabbis suggest, I wouldn't say this, by the way, but the rabbis suggest there are an overabundance of people, like 99% of the rest of humanity, that can donate their bodies for scientific research, and therefore don't do that if it's preferred not to do that, or you're not allowed to do that if you're Orthodox. But organ donation is a whole different thing. Even in the Orthodox world, the decision is made, that's saving a life. And yes, you can argue that, because remember, it's not like I am dying on life support and they can take my liver anywhere. Like what are the matching possibilities of an organ? Not great, right? So there's not even a chance. Well, there's a chance, but they have to go and take my sample, and they got to run it through the big computer. And there's a big computer, right? one big computer to see if there's anyone at that moment who needs a liver of my match, right? I remember even with bone marrow, they said there are 6 of 6 criteria or something like that that need to match. For a non-relative to have a 6 to 6 on these criteria match is highly unusual, but it happens. I happened to have some sort of thing in my bone marrow that was going to make it so that I would get called back again and again and again. They actually took me off the list after the 3rd time because they're like, oh, you did your work. And it wasn't fun for me personally because I'm a Jewish male and I don't do well with needles and pain and all of that stuff. But if your organ's going to match someone, if it's a match, you give it. You let it go, right? That is godly. But don't assume because I have donor on my card that they're going to keep my body on life support for long enough for them to then find a match for my liver, for whatever it is. Lungs, I know, for example, when I first got here, there was someone who had already received a lung transplant, I think he had cystic fibrosis, if I remember, and it was 8 years they lasted, which I think is a very long time, and you can't get a second donated anything. At that point, it was lungs, and then he eventually died. But he had those extra 8 years with his family, with his kids, because of a donor. Yes, do that. Do that. All right, we got to move on, otherwise I'll get stuck, and we'll go down rabbit holes, which is always fun. Gilgul HaNefesh. Woohoo! Sorry. That was Minnie Margulis, the woohoo. My grandmother. All right, she was saying hi. I underlined some important parts of this. I want to get the concept first. Don't read. Here's the concept. Gilgul, a gal, is a wave. There's an ebb and flow of souls. Pretend for a second, imagine, if you will, that your soul, forget about your body, your soul, we defined that last week and the week before, that spirit, that essence of you, is in a huge, remember the circle of life? Is in a huge, if you will, recycling process that is divine. A godly recycling process. It is going back and forth and ebbing and flowing from here to heaven, and back again, over and over. It is like a wave. It's crashing and then it's going back, and then it's crashing and then it's going back. Do you like all the visuals you're getting? That is Gilgul HaNefesh. That is the concept in Judaism of reincarnation. It is not, let me write a book and tell you about when I died and the great light that I saw. And no. We have to have some humility because now we're dealing in God's domain about this. So it's a sacred process. We learn in this is really not Torah-ish, but it's a little bit. There's that incident, if you remember, in 2 Samuel of King Saul, where he's talking to a diviner, like a magician, because he's about to get killed. And for those of you who haven't watched yet, and I think it's Prime Video, there's the House of David. And the very first episode, they have this interaction where Saul is going to this diviner. Now, some of the rabbis, because they don't want Jews to do that, will go back into the story and say he was mentally ill and having dreams. He was having hallucinations. No. Here's what we learned from the great rabbi of the Kabbalah, the Ari. You've heard of anyone who's been to Israel with me has been to Tzfat, and we went to the temple where the Ari prayed. In Tzfat, he's the author of Lecha Dodi. So the great Ari, the great rabbi of Jewish mysticism, stated that every person of Israel needs to be reincarnated many times until he has fulfilled all 613 commandments of the Torah in thought, in speech, and in action. This is in order to complete the garments of his soul. The rabbis of the Kabbalah loved comparing the human body to a Torah scroll with its crowns and its breastplates and its shininess and its covers and all that stuff. This is in order to clear it so that there will not be a missing garment. You got to go whole. The reason is in order to garb all 613 aspects and powers in one's soul so that, quote from another Tanya, which is, Tanya is like Hasidic literature. It's like Hasidic midrash, if you will, so that not one of them shall be lacking. What God wants, according to this, is for us all to perfect our souls. And you cannot, according to this, it's very impossible unless you're a tzaddik. Now, a tzaddik, a righteous person, is really a once-in-a-generation person. Like, there are very few tzaddiks in this world. It's a Maimonides probably thought he was a tzaddik. The Ari was probably, this is just one of those people who's like, not, so Mary Poppins is practically perfect. This is perfect. So it's like Mary Poppins plus kind of person. They may go right to heaven, but everyone else has to live many lives in order to complete the garments of his or her soul. I love this idea, by the way. As a human, you don't come back as an animal. You come back as a person. According to this, you come back as a person. And now, you may say, but wait a second, what if my burden from the last life is so heavy? Is that going to come in with me into my next life? And now I'm just going to be starting, not from scratch. I'm going to be starting from a place with a lot of deficit. And the answer is yes, according to our next text. Aha! I know this is very confusing, and we don't like this. Gilgul HaNefesh. There is yet another principle. This is from Derech Hashem, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, 1773. I like this text because it's got a lot of different texts combined with it, and I know it's hard to read because there's a lot of words. I'm going to read it fast because I want to leave more time for questions. There is yet another principle found in the direction of the matters of this world. This is hard to understand. I'm going to go slow. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get it out. That is the supreme wisdom. God is pure wisdom. God is pure intellect. For those of you who like, that whole thing, Aristotelian thing about the prophet king, right? God is pure intellect. At the top, you have to think about those sphirot, mysticism, the keter, the crown. That's God. Supreme wisdom arranged to expand salvation more, such that one soul comes into this world at various times, Patty, in different bodies. And behold, through this, it may repair. By the word in the text, in the Hebrew word, this is Hebrew, letaken, same thing. Tikkun. It may repair at a different time what is corrupted from a previous time, or perfect what it did not perfect. Notice, there's nothing about mitzvot here, right? This is just about your soul's perfection. That which was corrupted in a previous life, you now have a chance to fix, to heal, to letaken, to tikkun. However, at the end of all the incarnations in the judgment in the future to come, the trial will surely be regarding the soul. According to, again, it's not a composite, it's aggregate, all of the incarnations that it experienced at all the states in which it existed. And behold, It is possible that matters will occur to a person whose soul was reincarnated according to that which was caused to it from the angel and what it did in a previous incarnation. Remember, we talked about the angel that you have before, that's with you before you come into the world, and that's with you when you leave. But God's judgment is exacted upon each person according to what he or she is in, again, the aggregate, all of his aspects, meaning in all aspects of all the states, you are judged. So last week we talked about judgment. We talked about God has a crown sits in the chair of justice and compassion, and I'm sorry, not justice, of compassion and kindness and grace. So there's that God, and then there's the God who sits over here in the chair of judgment and justice. And what God does, because God is what? The supreme wisdom. Remember we talked last week, and when the Messiah comes, all disputes will be settled. Well, God does that now, which goes back to predetermination on some level. Like, God already knows the answer. Like, who should be no longer sent back, right? Whose soul should no longer be sent back for another incarnation? God knows that. We don't know that. That's out of our control. It's out of our hands. So when we're judged, but we're judged on the aggregate of many lives with one soul. So your soul does not change. It's the same. So Joe Lubernus, let's call it Joe Lubernus, exists then in another body at some point. God forbid, Steve Kahn comes back again in another body to work. But what it's also saying is all that crap that I have, and I'm talking about the stuff that's in the deep level of my soul, right? The darkness, if you will, or the struggles or the whatever, that comes back with me too. It may be erased from my conscience, but it's not erased from my soul, which means it's going to manifest itself. You know, sometimes you look at a kid. I do this sometimes. I see this up at camp. They're too young to be too messed up from life. There's something, I don't want to say not right, because the soul you have given me, O God, is pure, right? That's one of the things that we believe. But there's something off. There's something off. There's something where you say, that's an old soul. Like, that kid is not behaving like an 8-year-old. That kid is behaving, and it's a little creepy, like an adult. Like you're at camp, you go for the Shabbat walk up to services, and I just find myself with a rando kid at some point, or a group of kids walking up the hill to the thing. And sometimes I have this experience where I'm just like, I am not talking to an 8-year-old. Like, I am, because they're, chronologically 8 years old. But wow, what they're saying, not only, it's not enough to say I wouldn't have said it when I was 8. I probably wouldn't have. But it's like, wow, this kid is just something going on here. It's not off. There's just something different about them. That's what this is talking about. It's talking about those experiences from past lives that are in that aggregate that is judged ultimately. Ivy, and I want to just get a couple other people. Yeah. Deja vu? So that's a great question. Are there times, so first of all, there's a question about deja vu, which some would call an echo. It could be an echo of a past life. It can also be a premonition. The problem with premonition in Judaism, I'm not talking about in general life, in Judaism, premonitions are tricky. That's God's domain. You want to stay away from sorcery, magic, tarot cards, all of that stuff, unless you do it, in which case, right? Going back to what your mom said, do whatever you want. But you're supposed to stay away from that stuff, because if the person giving you the premonition or affirming your premonition is manipulating you, which is highly likely sometimes, you want to be careful of that. The question now goes to your second question. Can I have an awareness at some point in my life of a past life that's maybe not necessarily an echo or necessarily deja vu? According to this, it's not mentioned. It's not really mentioned. This is more about how we are judged. But, hold on one second. The Ari would say yes. Lori and I have talked about this a lot. I read a book, Many Lives, Many Masters. Many of you may have read that by a psychiatrist in Florida. And he regresses patients through hypnosis to work out some trauma, I'm to be very oversimplified, to work out something that's inside of them that is just not, it's not an exorcism. That's a Dybbuk, we're not even gonna do that because it's just too much. But you can look up Dybbuk, and there was a book called The Dybbuk. That's about someone who takes over your body. A different soul latches onto your body and takes over. That's an exorcism. That's a whole different category. But yes, according to this, if you look at this mitzvah thing and doing the mitzvahs, it says in the beginning, every person of Israel needs to be reincarnated many times until he has fulfilled all 613 commandments. What's implied in that is that your soul knows which commandments it needs to attach to. Your soul knows, it guides you. You know, your conscience be your guide. This is not that. This is ours, our version of let your conscience be your guide. The soul knows what it needs to attach to based on its experience that is not conscious. So the answer, simply put, is yes in this field of Jewish thought. Yes, Abby. Yes. Can we assume that a tzaddik has fulfilled the 613 commandments and therefore progresses? And the answer is yes. A tzaddik is the Jewish idea, not of a saint, but of a perfect human. And they are one in a generation. Even according to the rabbis, who probably thought they were all really smart and all that stuff. Even Maimonides says this is a once-in-a-generation person. A tzaddik is that person, once in a generation. And so, yeah, they get to transition. I want to spend, it's now 8 o'clock, 8:03. We're going to end in 10, 12 minutes. I'm going to do one more question. And then, Lori, I'll give you a second to ask a question. And then we're going to wrap up. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you're talking about resurrection. Yeah. Which is why the rabbi said, don't get cremated. You can't get cremated because you will have nothing left to be resurrected. Yeah. It was very practical, actually. Can your remains be put in a Jewish cemetery? It can in our cemetery. Even the Reform rabbis were opposed to keeping it at home. Why? Why do you think they were opposed to us keeping an urn at home on our mantle? Cleanliness. Why else? Idol worship. They didn't want us permanently mourning. So the idea, again, I'm not being judgmental. Think about this through the rabbinic lens of everything we've learned. The idea of having an urn with the ashes of a deceased loved one. All right, we've already decided not to bury them. Now we're going to put them at home, or we're going to put them in a thing around our neck, or put a little bit, you've seen those things that people have, is very, very not kosher. Because you are extending a connection with a corpse that is connected in Jewish law to the Dybbuk, to the demon. There's a very strict, when you take the magic class that I do at Living Room Learning, if you want to host a Living Room Learning, you're welcome to. Just talk to Susan. We'll hook you up. I do one on magic. The quickness of burial, I didn't talk about this last week, but the idea of burying quickly, of burying a person quickly is very much connected to get it in the ground so the demons and the Dybbuks don't get it. Stones around a grave or on top of a grave are to keep those spirits away because the stone is like a little temporary wall. So the answer to your question is we bury cremains at our cemetery. The new cemetery, not that new, the one up on Pinnacle Peak has a thing for cremains. Okay, cremains, cremated remains. It's a combined word. so we don't have to say cremated remains every time. Okay, Lori. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yep. Yep. You're in a moment, no? Right. Thank you. So Lori's point, for those who are going to be watching on YouTube, a lot of points, and you'll correct me if I'm misstating, but this is an area of expertise for Lori, not just the regressions and the process of helping people go into what I would call in the Venn diagram, the in between this world and the world to come, is there's a level of purity, of clarity of thought that you cannot get in this world, and your conscience, right, in this body, in this life, cannot really have clarity because there's so many things that get in the way of us understanding, of understanding each other, of understanding ourselves. You had said something once to me about you have to also judge yourself. You go through judgment of yourself, right? And why do you go through? Because you want to learn. Think about Yom Kippur, how many times you've left services, not because something in the sermon was said that lifted you, but because there was something in that particular service in that particular year that moved you, or that got really under your skin and upset you and shook you, positively or negatively. That's what this is all about. So in this in-between space, going back to the first week to help us understand this world, the world to come, are a series of steps. And one of those steps can be, according to our tradition, to come back. But the idea that Lori was saying about there being clarity here, if you are conscious while you are in that moment, and I believe people are very conscious, even if they're in a so-called coma. I cannot tell you in 30 years how many times I have gone to say the last vidui or a psalm, and people will say, Rabbi, they were waiting for you. And I'm like, no, come on. That's crazy. I can't. Anecdotal evidence proves to me that that is true. That people are waiting for permission, the final word. It's not me. It's the words I'm saying to them or to their family. And they're out of it, right? Because the morphine and the everything has taken them out of it. And there's something in our tradition, in a psalm that I read, in the words that I read, that gives them, and they die right there. Doesn't happen all the time, but it happens enough that I do believe that the words have meaning and power, especially if you're in a moment of transcendent clarity, and that's what this is. Now, here's the problem, guys, and then I'll answer last questions. Here's the problem. Transcendental, thank you, meditation, deep prayer, any kind of meditation. These are not controversial. These are ways of anchoring, right? We all want moments of clarity. We all do. We all want to have a moment in our day, in our week, in our month to have some clarity. Like that Yom Kippur moment when we're reading the prayer, and for some reason this year that prayer jumped out at me from the page. We all want that. That's what Judaism is for. At the end of the day, that's what Judaism is. It's the rituals, it's the rites, it's the rules, It's the living, it's the culture, it's the whole package of finding meaning and purpose. And finding and having and experiencing moments of clarity. When someone comes to me and says, I had a bad experience growing up and da-da-da-da-da-da, and I haven't been to a synagogue since I was 13, and da-da-da-da-da-da, I don't know what they expect me to say to them. Right? It's the temple's fault. It's the rabbi's fault. The cantor had bad breath. They were mean. The Israeli teacher yelled at me. Other than saying to someone, grow up, you're not 13 anymore, stop thinking like a 13-year-old, stop acting like a 13-year-old, get outside your comfort zone, nudge yourself a little bit. To do this, go for a hike. That's great. And if you have moments of clarity while hiking, yay. I do. It's like the only time I can have a complete thought is when I'm shut off. I get it. But Judaism provides us an opportunity, prayer, repentance, charity, all of these things, to transcend this world. Because sometimes this world sucks, and we want to transcend it. And we shouldn't have to wait until the end of our days to transcend it and have a moment of clarity. I should have, I could have, I would have, right? If you're stuck as a 13-year-old Jew, or even worse, if you send the message to your kids, and quote me on this, please put it out in public. After your bar mitzvah, you don't have to go anymore. Shanda, it's sinful. It's an actual sin. Because what you're saying to your kid is, it's over. It's transactional. And then, your kids are doing what they're doing, and they're hanging out with who they're hanging out with, and they don't want to be Jewish, and they hate Israel. Well, what do you think was going to happen? Because you left them at pre-adolescence empty, as an empty vessel. What the tradition, not God, is saying is we have opportunities in this world to make our world to come even greater. And Yom Kippur does it again for the 100th time: prayer, repentance, and charity. The ability to connect with God, pray. The ability to forgive others, which is purge your anger and the fear that comes with it, and the anger and the hate and that whole mess. Purge it. And charity, sacrificing something that you could otherwise use for yourself and giving it to others. Charity isn't just about money. We're having this big volunteer thing this week, right? Which I think says a lot about our community, right? Giving. Take yourself outside of yourself. Get out of yourself. Those are the ways that you get to experience that. Okay, last couple of questions. I want to make sure if anyone hasn't asked yet. Yeah, okay, Steve. What do you mean? Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Great question. So if I have my genetic code, and obviously I'm with someone else who has a genetic code, and we're passing it forward through procreation, which is why that's a mitzvah, or even not, because there is science now that at some point will allow us to take genetic code from one person and probably create another person. I don't know. Am I fulfilling that? It's not Gilgul HaNefesh, and I'm going to tell you why. Gilgul HaNefesh, if we go back to this is God's department, like this is the upper chamber, is about your soul being moved from body to body or life to life. Let's put it that way. The DNA part, and this is where the big AI questions are, because there's this big question in the world. There are many questions about AI, one of which is, will the artificial intelligence have a conscience? Decide right and wrong. Decide good and bad. Decide not good and bad in like a math problem way, but like, and the answer is, the Jewish answer is no. It can't. Artificial anything. Life cannot be experienced artificially. At some point, and I know the problem. Another problem with AI is will there be an emergency shutdown button, and we see the movies about this. And the answer is always Yeah, but then we're going to lose our internet, and who wants that? Right? So a soul is in God's dominion. A soul cannot be created by a DNA, what's it called? Copying and putting into it and then creating a life around it. Cloning. Thank you very much. Cloning. That's like the Star Wars stuff, right? The Jojo Fett or whatever, the guy who becomes the Empire, the Stormtroopers. They have like the first guy, and there's a whole bunch of movies you can go watch. Last questions from people who were not able to ask yet. And by the way, the good thing is I'm not like a guest lecturer. Come in, meet with me. We can talk about this anytime. Yes. So the question is, does Gilgal HaNefesh, reincarnation, only apply to Jews? My answer is, it applies, how do we say this? The answer is, we are not universalists, right? Our tradition gives us particularism. So the answer is yes, if you're Jewish. Does it only apply to Jews? Yeah, if you're a Jew. It only applies to Jews. In other words, it's in our tradition. I'm teaching you about it. It's part and parcel of Jewish legal living. Not legal living, Jewish living. It's part and parcel of it. But it's also a human thing, right? Because we do have certain particular Jewish concepts that are universal. Well, we call them in the American system, these truths we hold to be self-evident. Judaism has these truths we have so self-evident as well. Like we have the same concept, but whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, we're all children of God. We're all created in the image of God. It doesn't say in Genesis, and God created the Jews in God's image. But my non-flippant answer is yes. The Jewish way of looking at it, yes. And the Jewish way of looking at it happened to be adopted by lots of other people, right? We're not, sometimes I hesitate to say we came first and therefore, right? Except for the times that I'm not hesitant to say that. And this is one of those times. We brought to the world this particular message. Forget about reincarnation per se, but this message of the world and the world to come. And this is a great place to end because it's time. We brought that message to the world. We created this idea that there is God's domain and there is our domain, and we live in here. And to activate this to the highest of all potentials is to live a Jewish life. That's you want to get to know God? You got to talk to God. You want to get to know God? You have to learn and understand God. Like, I wasn't born with the knowledge that I have about Jewish life. I wasn't born with that. I worked my butt off and went to college and went to rabbinic school and studied and learned and listened and learned some more. I know you think I only talk, but listened and listened and listened and learned and picked up stuff. And it got integrated into this computer thing in my head. And out it comes. What makes me sad is if people think that they can't have access to this. It's there. Every answer to every question is there. I'm at about 5%. At 56 cents, that's so bad. I got 95% to go, but it may be that's what the reincarnation thing is, right? It takes a while, big picture, to access all of that knowledge. But I promise you, again, if you take your kid out of religious school after their bar mitzvah, forget it. It's over. That's the end of the game. And they will go and participate and be and want to be part of the 98.5% of people who are not Jewish. Is that bad? Is that good? It's neither. It just is. Don't be surprised that they come home and say, the Jewish state is genocidal. Don't be surprised. There's no DNA chip when you're born Jewish that makes that preposterous. But yeah, if the last time I entered a synagogue I was a teenager, yeah, that's what you get. Sorry. Okay. Lori, you had a last question. Is it a question? Because we got to let everyone. It's not a question. I'm not disagreeing. Okay, this. Right. So going back to that other slide that we learned about the sort of the aggregate of all of your experiences, right? So Lori said something that leads to another question. Then we're going to end here, and then I'm here for a while. I hope. So ask away. And if you have an idea, we're going to do the Rabbinic Scholars series next year. We're adding Rabbi Mason, and we're adding Rabbi Sharf. We're going to have like 5 or 6 of these series. If you have some ideas, let us know. I already know that Rabbi Mason's going to do something on ethics, on Jewish ethics. So the question is, like, if I'm not Jewish, can I have an experience also that fulfills my soul, that helps my soul to be more complete? Or even more particularly, do I need to not be Jewish, not be the gender that I am, not be an American, not be an English speaker, whatever it is? Of course, the Jewish text will not say yes. It'll say, no, this is a Jewish soul God thing. But I happen to believe that, that's totally plausible. What do I believe? I actually believe in a recycling system. I don't know if I believe, still out for a vote on this within myself. I believe in the eternality of the soul. I believe the souls are forever and ever and ever and ever. I don't know if I believe that you come back as a particular soul from life to life to life, or if it's thrown into this sort of divine recycling process, if you will, and aspects of my soul are then spread out into different souls. That part I haven't resolved in my head yet. In my head and my heart. I lean toward we all have aspects in our souls of the people, good, bad, indifferent, from whom we came, who are in our soul group, if you will, of people, of souls, I should say. Huh? Your DNA, spiritual DNA, I would say, or transcendent DNA. But yeah, I think that's sort of where I'm at today. As far as the other stuff goes, you can ask me personally, and I'll tell you what I believe. All right. You have successfully completed our 3-week class. Mazel tov and yesher koach.